Daniel Brooks would never forget that moment, the moment his entire world cracked open in a single breath. He walked into the grand hall of the Hale estate, wanting only to finish his last delivery of the day and make it in time to pick up his son from tutoring. But one glance was enough to freeze every muscle in his body. A massive portrait hung at the center of the marble wall, framed by warm golden lights, like the halo of a sacred relic, and the woman in the painting was Emma. His Emma. Emma, who had died 3 years earlier. The first thing Daniel felt was not pain, but violent denial, an instinctive, wordless scream inside his chest, insisting that this was impossible. But those eyes, soft brown eyes, that once met his every morning, that faint curve of her smile that used to dissolve all his exhaustion, and the tiny birthmark on her left cheek, none of that could be coincidence. There was no duplicate, no mistake. That was Emma. Even as his heart screamed the truth, the inscription beneath the portrait slapped him with a completely different reality. Madeline Hale, beloved sister. Daniel stared at the name as if it were some cosmic cipher, an invisible accusation carved into his mind. The woman he married, the woman he buried, the woman he believed he knew down to her. Every breath had carried another name, another life, another identity that had never belonged to him. He staggered back one step, then another. His legs trembled, as if disconnected from his body. His shoulders dropped, and the delivery bag slipped from his grasp, hitting the stone floor with a loud clack that echoed across the vast hall. The sound made several staff members look over, stretching the tense silence thinner, as if the entire room were bracing for something to shatter. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat scorched dry. Why was Emma here? Why was her portrait displayed so prominently in the estate of one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in all of New England? And why was she called Madeline? In that moment, Daniel felt as if he were staring directly into a second life that his wife had lived beyond his reach, a life she had hidden, buried, and taken with her to the grave. As he struggled to steady himself against the spiral of confusion, a sharp voice cut through the air behind him. "What are you doing here?" Daniel turned and saw Karen Douglas, the estate manager, a woman in her middle years, with posture straight as a blade, and the quick assessing gaze of someone accustomed to authority. But when her eyes landed on Daniel's face, they changed, tightened, widened, then drained of color until she looked ashen. Daniel tried to breathe, although his lungs felt crushed. He pointed at the portrait, his voice trembling and broken. "The woman in that painting, she is my wife, Emma Brooks. She died 3 years ago." Karen stepped back, as if she had been slapped. Any hint of practiced professionalism disappeared, leaving only raw, instinctive shock, as if she had just seen a ghost. No, that cannot be," she stammered sharply, then spun toward the entrance and shouted, Mrs. Hale, come down here immediately." Daniel's heart pounded so violently he could hear it thundering in his ears. His breath felt jagged, each inhale tearing through him like broken glass. This was no coincidence now, not a look-alike, not some strange resemblance. This was a secret, a lie. A piece of Emma's life that had never belonged to him, yet lived here in the cold luxury of the Hale estate. Footsteps echoed rapidly along the walnut spiral staircase. A woman appeared at the top, powerful, sharp, yet carrying the quiet sorrow of an old wound. Victoria Hale, mistress of the estate billionaire owner of Hale International. When her gaze met Daniel's, nothing happened. But when her eyes shifted to the portrait, her entire body stopped. Her hands clenched together, her lips trembled. and in her eyes something erupted like a ghost from the past, clawing its way back to demand the truth. "You said," Victoria's voice cracked, "she was your wife." Daniel nodded, though he was no longer sure he could even stand upright. Victoria stared at Emma, at Madeline, at the woman in the painting. Then she turned back to Daniel, searching his face, as though trying to stitch together two worlds that never should have collided. In that moment, Daniel understood one thing: he was not the only one who had lost Emma. Not the only one scarred by her absence. Not the only one standing before a truth powerful enough to destroy everything. The atmosphere in the hall thickened until even the air felt still, as if the entire estate were holding its breath. Victoria whispered, her eyes red, yet sharp as a blade. "She was my sister," and that was the moment Daniel felt it. The world he knew had ended. Everything he believed about his wife, the little family he had built, the grief he had struggled to mend, was nothing more than thin ice ready to splinter. Beneath it waited a truth, vast, dark, and devastating, a truth he had never imagined. Emma was not just his wife. She was Madeline Hale, the missing heir of a billionaire dynasty, and the secret she carried was rising from the grave to consume the life he thought he understood. The air inside the Hale Grand Hall thickened, as if someone had pressed a button that stopped time entirely. Daniel stood before Victoria Hale, feeling as though a tidal wave he could not see the bottom of was about to drag him under. And Victoria, a woman who had weathered hundreds of high-stakes meetings, multi-billion-dollar deals, and even media scandals, was now trembling like a child swallowed by the dark. Her eyes locked onto Daniel, then drifted back to the portrait, then returned to him again, as if her mind were desperately trying to reconcile two images that were never meant to exist in the same world. "She is dead," Victoria asked, her voice dropping into a heavy, hollow register that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. He nodded, and even that small motion scraped painfully inside him, like his heart tearing a little more each time he acknowledged the truth. 3 years ago, a car accident. The words barely escaped him, more breath than sound. That memory, the rain-soaked night, the clash of metal, the blur of red lights through tears, had long been a scar. But saying it aloud here, in this house, full of strangers and truths he never knew existed, reopened it, as if the wound had never healed. Victoria's lips trembled. Behind her, Karen's face had turned as pale as the stone wall beside her. "No, Madeline cannot," Victoria whispered each word, breaking like a sob. "I searched for her for 14 years. Not a trace. Not a signal. No, she cannot die before I learn what happened." Daniel heard it then. Not just grief, but guilt, the kind that gnaws through the strongest people in the dead of night, the kind that makes a woman who rules empires crumble when forced to speak her sister's name. She went by Emma. Daniel said, "Emma Brooks. She never mentioned her family. Not once." Victoria's hands tightened until her fingers whitened. "Madeline," she breathed as though calling to a ghost. Why would she change her name? Why disappear? Karen tried to speak, but her lips quivered too much. In the end, it was Daniel who broke the silence. "I need to know why my wife's portrait is here," he said, his voice cracked but sharp as a dulled blade. "I need to know who she really was." Victoria nodded faintly, then, without another word, walked toward the corridor, leading to the East Wing sitting rooms. "Follow me," she said, her voice so soft it was nearly just air. Daniel hesitated for a moment, but then moved after her. His legs waited, as if chained. He did not know what he was about to hear, but a deep instinct told him his life would not return to anything calm after this. The small sitting room deep within the east wing felt warmer than the cold, imposing grandeur of the hall. The late afternoon light spilled through the tall glass windows, washing the room in heavy gold. Victoria stood before the window, arms crossed tightly, as if holding herself up. "Madeline was my sister," she began. 14 years younger than me, brilliant, stubborn, and always craving more freedom than this family ever allowed. Daniel sat at the edge of the chair, feeling like he was balanced on a tightrope, strung between past and present. Victoria continued, her voice steady, but full of shards she fought to contain. "Our father was a man of immense ambition. He built the Hale Empire from nothing, but he also turned us, his children, into assets. Relationships, appointments, education, everything chosen for the benefit of the family name." Madeline hated it. Daniel closed his eyes. He could imagine Emma or Madeline, with her soft smile and bright eyes, being forced into a cold life she never wanted. And he finally understood why she never spoke of her past. When she was 22, Victoria said Madeline fell in love with an ordinary man, someone our mother disapproved of. My mother threatened to destroy his life. And Madeline heard every word. Daniel's eyes opened, his heart twisting painfully. The threads between her hidden past and their shared life began to connect in ways that made his chest ache. One night, Victoria said quietly. She vanished. Took nothing but a small bag. She left only a note that said, "I am sorry. I cannot live in this cage anymore." Daniel felt his throat tighten until it hurt. Emma, his Emma, the woman who always smiled softly and told him the past did not matter as long as the present held him, and Liam had been running. How had he never seen that shadow behind her smile? Victoria turned to him then. Her eyes no longer carried the cold precision of a billionaire businesswoman, but the raw, desperate grief of a sister who had searched half her life for someone she loved. "Now I need you to tell me," she breathed. "How did Madeline Emma live? Was she happy? Was she safe? Was she loved?" Daniel took a deep breath, and memories of Emma washed over him like a warm tide, her quiet singing while she cooked her gentle hands, tending to their son's clothes, the soft, steady gaze she gave him after long, exhausting days. He nodded. She was happy, he said, voice trembling. She was loved. And she loved us. Victoria closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek, slow and heavy. But Daniel knew that tear was not only grief. It was the relief of someone who had finally found an answer after 14 years spent searching for a missing piece of her heart. Yet beneath that tear there were more questions, rising, shadows shifting, and Daniel felt with the certainty of a man who once lived beside Emma and knew her silences intimately that her secret was far from over. This was only the first door, and he was about to walk into the room holding the truth his wife had spent her entire life trying to bury. In the room washed with the warm light of the Hale estate's late afternoon sun, the air seemed to settle into a thin veil of stillness, wrapping itself around the memories Victoria was trying to pull back from fragments long faded with time. Daniel sat silently, his hands clasped so tightly, his knuckles turned white, his heart thundering in his chest as if trying to break free. Every word Victoria spoke cut deeper into the image of the woman he thought he had fully known. Yet at the same time, the need to understand the truth held him firmly in place. He needed to know who Emma was, what she had run from, and why she chose him, an ordinary man, over the life of unimaginable luxury anyone else would have given everything to possess. After Madeline disappeared, Victoria said her eyes drifting toward the garden beyond the glass, as if trying to see through more than a decade of time. I searched for her everywhere. I hired investigators. I contacted the police. I even visited all the places she went during her university years, but there was no trace. It was as if she vanished from the world entirely. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He had never asked Emma much about her past, because she always answered with that soft, slightly wistful smile. My past does not matter. What matters is that we are here together. He had believed it was simply her way of avoiding painful memories. But now he understood her true purpose. Emma had been trying to erase her former life completely to become someone new. Victoria's fingers grazed the silver necklace around her neck, her voice dropping. My sister once told me she hated living under constant control. Every meal, every schedule, every person she was allowed to speak to. My mother was extremely strict. Not just strict. She saw us as extensions of an empire with no right to make mistakes, no right to love anyone she did not approve of. Daniel studied her face and recognized a pain that was more than just grief over a missing sister. It was the sorrow of someone who had grown up in a home where personal choice had no space to exist. A shiver ran through him as he realized the scars Emma carried were deeper than anything he had ever imagined. Once Victoria continued, Madeline told me that if she could, she wanted to know what it felt like to be normal. To work a normal job, to meet normal people, to love a normal man without worrying about the press or my parents ripping that man out of her life. She wanted the kind of life this family would never allow her to have. Daniel felt his heartbeat falter. He whispered, "She had that." Victoria paused, then looked at him as though she wanted to etch his words permanently into her memory. She was happy Daniel swallowed hard and nodded. Happy. She loved cooking. She loved quiet evenings with her family. Whenever I came home from work, she would be waiting at the door, smiling, saying that as long as we were safe, nothing else mattered. She lived so fully. Victoria smiled softly, though her eyes glistened. That is all she ever wanted. She whispered a life no one had the right to dictate. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He looked at the portrait of Emma or Madeline on the wall, and in that moment he finally saw the loneliness in her eyes, something he had never fully understood. When she smiled, it was always gentle and bright. But sometimes late at night, when she stared out the window, her eyes carried a sorrow he could never explain. He used to think she missed a distant family, or felt worn down by their modest life. Now he knew it was the sorrow of a woman who had lost an entire world and rebuilt her own from nothing alone, afraid of ever being found. Did she ever mention family? Victoria asked quietly. Daniel shook his head. Not once. She told me she had no family, that she grew up in the foster system. I believed her. Victoria closed her eyes. She said that to protect you, to protect the little family she built for herself. Silence settled between them. The breeze through the window stirred the white curtains, the soft rustling, almost like the fading breath of a woman slipping further from their grasp. Daniel rested a hand against his forehead as a deeper, sharper pain sank in. Emma had lived in fear. Fear of being found. Fear of dragging him into the orbit of wealth, power, and control she had escaped. Fear of losing the peace she fought so hard to build. And she had carried that secret to her final moment. At last, it was Victoria who broke the suffocating quiet. "How did you meet her?" Daniel let out a faint, bitter-sweet smile as the memory surfaced. "I delivered goods to a small cafe. She was the new waitress. She asked if I wanted to try the coffee she made. Then she handed me a croissant with a burnt edge and said, 'I slipped, but it is still good.'" He let out a broken laugh. She talked to me as if we had known each other for years, as if I were not some nobody, some broke delivery guy. She looked me straight in the eye. No judgment. No hesitation. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Victoria's expression softened. "That was Madeline," she said. "Her heart was bigger than any room in this house." Daniel nodded, his eyes stinging. But amid the tenderness of the memory, a sharp question rose, one he could no longer avoid. Why, Daniel asked, did she never return? She could have sent you a single message, just so you knew your sister was alive. Victoria stared at him for so long, he felt the entire room stretch around them. Then she spoke, her voice heavy enough to crack. "Because if she contacted me, my mother would find her. And if she did," Victoria drew a trembling breath, "she would lose everything, including you, including your son." The words hit Daniel like a hammer to the chest. His fingers dug into the armrest, not out of anger at Emma, but out of devastating understanding. She had lived her entire life looking over her shoulder, all to shield him and their son from a family she knew would never let them live in peace. Daniel whispered, "She sacrificed that much." Victoria looked at him with deep, knowing sorrow. "She loved you enough to give up her entire life to keep you safe from everything she endured." Daniel's throat closed, leaving him unable to speak. He had once believed Emma was simply a quiet, gentle woman, slightly private about her past. Now he understood. She was a woman who abandoned her identity, her fortune, her safety, and her family to claim her freedom. She had been reborn, and he, a poor delivery driver, was the man she chose, the life she chose, the risk she chose. But that secret was no longer hers alone. It was becoming a weight pressing down on Daniel and on their young son Liam, and he felt with terrifying clarity that this was only the beginning. The most painful part of the truth was still waiting ahead. The air inside the small room of the Hale estate fell silent after Victoria's final words. But it was not a peaceful silence. It felt like the moment before a storm when the ground grows unnaturally still, only to warn that something explosive is gathering strength beneath it. Daniel felt as if he could no longer breathe, yet his mind would not stop racing, spinning through scattered memories of Emma. The Emma he loved. The Emma he thought he understood, only to realize he had barely touched the surface of an ocean of secrets. Victoria's eyes bore into him, no longer the gaze of a powerful chairwoman of a pharmaceutical empire, but of a sister who had just recovered the faintest trace of the sibling she lost than a decade ago. But beneath that gaze, Daniel saw something else, suspicion, not suspicion of him, but suspicion of her own emotions. Could it truly be possible that the woman in the portrait was the same woman who lived a quiet life beside him? Could it be real that the 6-year-old child waiting at his after-school program shared blood with the Hale family? That question fluttered in the air between them like a trapped blackbird, beating its wings desperately inside a room too small. Eventually, Daniel was the one to break the stifling tension. "I need to be certain," he said, his voice raw and nearly unrecognizable. "Not because I doubt Emma, but because if this is real, my son's life will never be the same." Victoria inhaled deeply, her hands trembling slightly as her fingers laced together. "I need to be certain as well," she replied, "not to take anything from you. But I have searched for Madeline for too long. I cannot allow my heart to believe the wrong thing again." Her words struck Daniel sharply. He understood her. He knew her pain was real. But just as empathy warmed him for a moment, a deeper fear spiraled up. The Hale family was wealthy, powerful, and he was just a delivery driver living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a working-class neighborhood. If a DNA test confirmed that Liam was her sister's grandson, what would follow? Victoria continued, "I will arrange for a laboratory team to come to your home. A private collection. You will not need to step into the estate again unless you choose to." Daniel nodded. Though his lips were so dry, he struggled to speak. He could not stop imagining the possibility of losing his son. Victoria had said she had no intention of taking anything from him, but the world of the wealthy operated under rules he had never lived close enough to understand, yet enough to fear by instinct alone. When he left the Hale estate that afternoon, Daniel drove his old car without truly seeing the road. Traffic lights changed color without him noticing. The wind through the open window brushed past him without sensation. In his mind, there was only one image, Emma's smile on his birthday the previous year. A gentle smile, always softened by a thin veil he could never touch. Now he understood it had never been simple sadness. It was the weight of living in constant fear. That night, Daniel did not sleep. He sat by the window watching the city lights blur against the glass. Liam slept peacefully in his room, clutching the stuffed dinosaur Emma had bought him. Each small, steady breath from his son tightened Daniel's chest. He was terrified, not of the truth itself, but of losing someone again. Terrified that some invisible force would appear and take his child away, just as Emma had once had her entire life torn from her. 3 days later, the lab technician arrived, a young woman professional in manner, carrying a kit of sterile tools. Liam giggled as she gently swabbed the inside of his cheek. "It tickles," he squealed. Daniel forced a smile, though his hand trembled when he signed the consent form. When the technician stepped out the door, Daniel felt as though he had surrendered a piece of his heart. The days that followed stretched endlessly, each one feeling like a year. He went to work as usual, but every delivery, every casual conversation, every moment alone in his car was scattered by the crushing weight of uncertainty. Occasionally he reread the messages from Victoria, polite questions like, "How is Liam doing? What does he enjoy?" He responded to some, not all. Part of him wanted to trust that she only wished to reclaim memories of a lost sister. But another part, wounded, cautious, kept its distance. Then the 7th day arrived. The results were delivered in a plain, white envelope. Daniel sat in his car staring at it, resting on the passenger seat. The printed letters on the front seemed to tremble with him. At last he tore it open. 2 pages, rows of numbers, charts comparing genetic markers he could not interpret. But the conclusion at the bottom was unmistakable. Results indicate a maternal aunt to nephew relationship with a probability of 99.9%. The paper slipped from his hands as if burning hot. He leaned back in the seat eyes, shut tight. His whole body flooded with conflicting emotions. Relief that the truth was finally undeniable pain, that Emma had carried such a secret alone until death, and fear. Fear because he knew Liam's life would never again be simple or quiet. He called Victoria. She answered after a few rings. "It is real," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "Liam is your nephew." On the other end of the line, Daniel heard a gasp, then a choked sound, then a long silence, like shattered glass falling in slow motion. "Thank you," Victoria whispered. "Thank you for not hiding this from me." Daniel gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady himself. "We need to talk," he said. "I need to know what Emma was running from. And what might still be chasing her." Victoria agreed instantly, without hesitation. When Daniel drove back toward the Hale estate once more, he felt as though he were heading into a new kind of battle. A battle fought not with weapons, but with memories, truth, and the fractured pieces of love left behind by the people who were no longer there. What he did not realize was that this battle would not only unearth the past, it would tear open the future as well, a future he, Liam, and even Victoria could not yet imagine. For when loss opens the door for truth, to enter truth rarely stops there. It always demands more, and more. Daniel returned to the Hale estate in the evening, just as the sun sank behind the tall rows of maple trees surrounding the vast property, a place so large he always felt as though he were stepping into a world separate from the rest of reality. Golden light spilled from the tall windows, stretching across the white gravel, and forming a ribbon-like path that drew him deeper inside, like a ceremonial welcome or a silent warning. Inside Daniel's chest, that feeling always hovered somewhere between both. Victoria Hale greeted him at the east entrance, not with the sharp composure of a billionaire matriarch, but with a quietness that made her look like someone who had just walked through a heavy storm clothes, perfectly arranged, yet the soul inside drenched. On the coffee table in the sitting room, dozens of photo albums were neatly arranged alongside a few dark wooden boxes. The albums were thick, bound in leather, embossed in gold with the title The Hale Family, and looking at them made Daniel feel as if he were about to flip through the historical record of a dynasty, not the memories of the woman he once held in his arms each night. Victoria slid one album toward him. "This is Madeline at 7. Daniel opened the first page and felt his heart sink. The girl in the photo was Emma, his Emma, but her eyes did not carry the quiet sadness he remembered. Instead, they sparkled with curiosity, even mischief. Her brown hair was tied high, her white dress flared mid-spin, and a smile full and radiant gleamed with a freedom that perhaps in adulthood she had paid her entire life to reclaim. He turned to the next page. Emma at a piano lesson, small fingers poised above the keys, eyes focused and shining with joy. Then ballet photos, camping photos, charity event photos. Each picture meticulously labeled with dates, locations, even the photographer's name, organized with the kind of precision that characterized everything belonging to the Hale lineage. Daniel felt everything at once, emotion, sorrow, and a kind of numbing disbelief. How had this girl, the daughter of privilege, raised in luxury, and trained by the best of the best, become the Emma he knew? A waitress in a small cafe, living in a rented apartment, eating instant noodles at the end of the month, and finding perfect happiness in a simple family dinner, beneath the dim glow of a cheap candle. But Daniel knew the answer. Emma chose all of it, chose it with her own hands. Victoria opened another album, her voice soft, as though afraid of crushing fragile memories. This is when Madeline started to change. Photos from age 16 no longer held the bright spark. Her posture grew straighter, more rigid, her gaze deeper as if hiding something. By 18, the smile had nearly disappeared. My father died that year. Victoria said, her eyes drifting somewhere distant. My mother became even stricter. She wanted control over everything. and Madeline could no longer breathe in this house. Daniel laid his hand on the page, feeling the coolness of the paper, while sensing the beating of Emma's heart within it, resilient yet unbearably lonely. "She never told me," he whispered. Victoria nodded gently. "Because if you knew, you would have tried to help her. And if you did, my family would have found her." That was what Madeline feared most. Daniel closed his eyes. Images of Emma sitting silently by the window late at night, staring out, as though listening for footsteps from a past she was running from, suddenly made sense. Victoria reached for a small wooden box and placed it on the table between them. "I found this in Madeline's room the day she disappeared. My mother forbade anyone from touching it, but I kept the key." She opened the lid. Inside were small personal items, a handmade red string bracelet, several folded sheets of paper, a candid photo of Madeline laughing while running across a lawn, and a cheap concert ticket. Daniel looked at each item, as if staring into pieces of Emma's abandoned soul. Victoria unfolded one of the papers, her hands trembling. "These are pages from her journal. I only read them after you left last time." She handed Daniel a thin pastel blue notebook. He opened the first page. Emma's handwriting appeared neat, gentle, heavy with emotion. "Today Mother told me I only have value when I become who she wants. I do not know who I am anymore. Each day feels like my breath belongs to someone else." Daniel tightened his grip on the journal. The nighttime breeze stirred the curtain softly, but he felt it like the final exhale of an exhausted spirit. Victoria continued. "The last pages, they are about a man." Daniel looked up sharply, his heart missing a beat. Victoria read slowly. "He does not know who I am, and that is what makes me feel alive. He looks at me as though I am myself, not the Hale name. I am afraid if my family finds out, they will force him out of my life. I am afraid I will hurt him. But I think I already love him." Victoria's voice faded, but Daniel barely heard her anyway. The room's sounds drifted far away, leaving only one sentence tolling like a bell in his mind. "He does not know who I am, but he chooses me." That was him. Emma had loved him with a purity so profound. She had been willing to forsake her entire past, her wealth, her identity, her security, her family, everything. Daniel set the journal down, his hands still trembling. "She really chose me," he whispered. Victoria looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears, yet glowing with deep respect. "You gave her something this family never could, a life of her own." Daniel felt his heart expand for a brief, fragile moment, but the warmth was quickly pierced by a darker thought. If Emma had to sacrifice her entire family just to be free, what pain had been great enough to keep her from ever returning even once, and what had happened in the final years of her life that made her carry her secret to the grave? Victoria rose and selected one final album. "You want to know how Madeline became Emma?" She opened it. The first page held a photo of 22-year-old Madeline standing in the front yard, determination blazing in her eyes. The next page held a receipt documenting a withdrawal of $50,000 from her trust fund. Then a copy of a long-distance bus ticket. Then nothing. "This was the last day I ever saw her," Victoria said, her voice close to breaking. "She left our world in that moment." Daniel stared at the photo for a long time. He did not see a privileged young heiress. He saw Emma, the woman who held him when he lost his job, who cried when she could not lull Liam to sleep, who laughed sincerely over a simple cup of hot cocoa. And he understood what he had to face next was not only the truth of her past, but the truth buried in what she left behind, truth that could reshape his future, Liam's future, and the entire Hale family's future. "We still do not know everything," Victoria said, as if reading his thoughts. Daniel nodded. "I am ready for all of it." But he did not yet know that the part of the truth about to unfold would not bring only clarity. It would bring the very darkness Emma spent her life trying to shield him from, and that darkness was now moving toward him. Daniel returned to his small apartment late that night, carrying with him the flood of images and memories he had uncovered at the Hale estate. The entire drive home felt as if he were holding a piece of Emma's soul beside him. Her childhood smiles, her ballet steps, the growing silence in her eyes as her life became suffocating under her family's control, all weaving themselves together into a sorrow that was deep, beautiful, and unmistakably painful. Liam had long fallen asleep, curled around his favorite stuffed dinosaur, his quiet breathing like the whisper of peace. Daniel stood at the doorway watching his son in the soft glow of the nightlight. In that moment, he understood more clearly than ever that Emma had chosen him not out of escape, but because she had seen in him something she had never known before: a place to rest, a simple life, a small family untouched by power or expectation. And thinking about that made Daniel's heart tighten as though an invisible hand clenched around it. He knew now that Liam's life had changed forever, and the weight of that truth filled him with gratitude and fear in equal measure. The days that followed moved in their usual rhythm, yet carried a new heaviness, like the air before a storm. Liam still went to school, still brought home drawings to show his father, still grinned brightly when Daniel bought him a small toy car. But each time Daniel looked at him, he saw flashes of Emma standing in the kitchen with her old apron humming softly as she stirred soup, her eyes sparkling as Liam took his first wobbly steps. All of it only to vanish in a single merciless rainy night. One afternoon, as Daniel sat in his delivery truck, his phone vibrated. The name on the screen made his heart skip. Victoria. He hesitated for a moment, then answered. Her voice was softer, lighter than usual, as though she had cried before dialing. "I am sorry to bother you," Victoria said. "I just wanted to ask, is Liam doing well?" A simple question, but Daniel heard layers beneath it. Not curiosity, not control, but a genuine need to know about the child who carried her sister's blood. Daniel replied, "He is fine. He is learning about planets. He thinks Mars is the coolest place in the universe." Victoria let out a small laugh, gentle and real, as if waking up a part of herself she had forgotten. "Madeline loved astronomy too," she whispered. She used to read about constellations every night. A warm silence stretched between them. When the call ended, Daniel sat in his truck, staring at the darkened screen. He realized he was smiling just a little. And then guilt washed over him, an instinctive reaction to letting his heart open towards someone other than Emma. He wondered whether he had the right to feel something resembling relief in speaking to Victoria, whether it was a betrayal of Emma. But then, in the deepest part of him, he heard the echo of the woman he loved. "You deserve to keep living." 3 days later, a package appeared at his door, surprising him. The label carried the sender's name, Victoria Hale. Daniel handed the box to Liam, who shouted with delight when he opened it. Inside were 3 picture books about the solar system and a stuffed triceratops. There was also a small handwritten note for Liam the nephew. "My sister never had the chance to meet. Victoria." Liam hugged the new dinosaur and ran circles around the living room like a small whirlwind. Daniel watched him, unsure what to feel. Joy, fear, gratitude, guilt, everything blended together into something too large to define. That night, Daniel sent Victoria a short message. "Thank you. He loves it." Less than a minute later, she replied, "I am very glad. My sister loved dinosaurs when she was little." Daniel lingered on that message longer than he expected. Something in him wanted to keep talking, but he locked the screen. He could not allow any unnecessary ties, at least not yet. His heart, however, didn't obey. Day by day, Daniel found himself thinking about Victoria more often, not as the wealthy woman he must be cautious of, but as a soul trying to find her way back from over a decade of loneliness. She had lost Madeline when her sister ran away, lost her again when she never returned, and now lost her a third time by learning of her death. One evening Victoria called again. This time her voice trembled. "Daniel, I just want to ask, did she ever talk about me?" Daniel stayed silent for a moment. Then he answered honestly, "No. But she had a way of looking at me where I felt she was carrying a very important memory. She never shared it, but I think she missed you." A soft, broken sound slipped through the speaker. Daniel closed his eyes. He did not want to feel what he was feeling, but he could not stop himself from grieving for Victoria too, a woman strong enough to build an empire, yet unbearably fragile when it came to her little sister. As they talked longer, Daniel heard her breathing slowly calm, grow steadier, as though simply being understood eased a burden she had carried for years. When the call ended, Daniel realized his heart had moved closer to hers, without him even noticing the moment it happened. But phone calls were only the beginning. When Victoria asked to meet Liam once, Daniel hesitated for a long time. Liam, however, was different. "I want to meet Aunt V," he said brightly when Daniel explained gently. "She gave me books and a dinosaur. I want to show her my picture of Jupiter." Daniel sighed. "All right. But I will be right there." They met at a quiet park on Saturday afternoon. Victoria arrived not as a billionaire, but in a soft knit coat, her hair falling naturally around her shoulders. When she saw Liam running toward her, her eyes lit up, as if a long-lost piece of her soul were returning. She knelt down with open arms. Liam stopped in front of her, smiling. "I am Liam." Victoria smiled back, and something in that smile made Daniel feel as though an old wound inside her had begun to close. "I am Victoria," she said, her voice trembling. "I am very happy to meet you." When Liam handed her his drawing of Jupiter, Victoria laughed through her tears. "You draw beautifully," she whispered, brushing his hair. Daniel watched from a short distance, and that was when he realized the truth he had avoided for so long. Victoria and Liam's worlds were connecting by a thread. Even death could not sever family. But the moment that made Daniel's heart stumble was when Victoria's eyes accidentally met his. In that brief instant, he saw not just grief, not just gratitude, but something softer, warmer, more dangerous, something he was not ready to name. He looked away immediately, afraid of how fast emotion could rise inside him. But that single moment opened a door none of them could ever close again. A door Emma, even in death, seemed to be standing behind, gently placing her hand upon it, whispering, "Keep living." The moment Daniel's eyes met, Victoria's in that park, felt like a tiny spark struck between two stones, worn down by time and loss, a fragile spark, yet powerful enough to burn through the defenses they had both carried for years. Daniel turned away immediately, afraid his own gaze had revealed something he did not dare name: warmth, empathy, and something far more dangerous, a quiet closeness growing between two people who should have had no reason to find one another, except for the invisible thread called Madeline. Victoria, however, did not look away. Her heart trembled in a way she could not remember feeling for a very long time. Perhaps not since before Madeline disappeared. Perhaps not since before she became the cold, precise executive who had to hide every real emotion to survive a world full of daggers disguised as smiles. Daniel walked her to her car, while Liam played behind them. When they stopped at the edge of the parking lot, a thin, taut silence stretched between them like a drawn violin string. "Thank you," Victoria said softly and sincerely, "for letting me meet Liam." Daniel nodded, but avoided her eyes. "He likes you. He does not have many relatives." Victoria's lips tightened slightly at the word, a formality that was neither overly intimate nor distant, but enough to remind her that Daniel was building an invisible wall, a wall she was not sure she wanted to break or even should break. "And thank you," Daniel added quietly, for not making things uncomfortable. Victoria gave a small, bitter-sweet smile. "There are already many things that are uncomfortable, Daniel. We are only trying not to make them worse." Daniel had no answer for that, and when he said nothing, Victoria did not push further. But when their eyes met once more before she stepped into her car, Daniel saw what he feared most, her pain reflecting his own. Two people grieving the same woman. Two people lonely because of the same woman. Two people drawn to each other because of the same woman. And that made everything far too dangerous. In the days that followed, Daniel tried to return to his old life, but moments that once felt peaceful now became a stage for intrusive thoughts. He remembered the way Victoria knelt to hug Liam, the way she laughed when the boy called Jupiter a giant ball, the way she looked at Daniel when they stood together in the park. He tried to push each memory away like smoke, but the smoke only drifted back, sinking into his lungs until he could no longer breathe freely. And Victoria felt the same. She sat in her glass office, high above the city, surrounded by stacks of documents and deals worth millions of dollars, yet the only thing she could think about was Liam's smile and Daniel's eyes. Eyes strong, yet wounded, as though he was carrying the weight of the world on shoulders never meant for such burdens. She scolded herself, then wondered, what would Madeline think? Would her sister hate her for letting her heart tilt toward the man who once belonged to her? Or would Madeline, the woman who wrote in her journal that she wanted Daniel to be happy, smile and give them her blessing? Victoria did not have the courage to answer. On a Thursday night, just as Daniel finished his shift and sat in his truck ready to drive home, Victoria called. He almost ignored the phone, but his finger slid across the screen before he could stop himself. Daniel Victoria's voice was so soft it was almost a breath. "I am sorry if I made things uncomfortable the other day." Daniel leaned back in his seat, staring at the dark ceiling. "It is not your fault. I just am not used to it." Victoria understood. Their emotions were walking across thin ice, and a single wrong step could send them both plunging into waters from which neither might emerge. "I just wanted to say, if you need anything for Liam's school insurance, doctor's tuition, you only have to ask. I will help." The offer shook Daniel, not because he wanted to refuse, but because it touched the most vulnerable part of him, the quiet desperation of a single father trying to give his son a better life. "I do not want to take advantage of you," Daniel said. Victoria answered instantly without hesitation. "And I do not want my nephew to go without anything. This is not taking advantage. This is family responsibility." Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The word family lodged in his throat. Family, once a word he believed belonged only to him, Emma and Liam. Now it included Victoria, a woman he did not know where to place in his life. That night, Daniel stood outside Liam's bedroom for a long time, listening to the boy sleep. Then he remembered the moment in the park, the light in Victoria's eyes, when she held Liam, the look of someone who had recovered something irreplaceable. And at that memory, Daniel felt it again. That dangerous feeling, that beautiful feeling, that wrong feeling. He knew he should stop it, hold himself back. But every time he tried to push Victoria away, his heart pulled her closer, as though both of them were caught in a gravitational pull stronger than reason. One night, Victoria sent him a message. "Maybe I am wrong, but I think Madeline wanted us not to be alone." Daniel stared at the screen, his chest stripped bare. He typed a reply, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, he sent only this: "I do not want to hurt anyone anymore." Victoria replied within seconds, "Neither do I. But sometimes pain brings people to each other." That sentence lingered in Daniel's mind long into the night. In the quiet darkness, he finally admitted the truth he had been trying to outrun. He did not simply empathize with Victoria. He was drawn to her strength wrapped in doubt, her softness wrapped in grief, and the unexpected calm she brought into days that felt like he was drifting without anchor. But whatever this feeling was, if it was real, it did not belong to him alone. It involved Liam. It involved Emma's memory. It involved a woman who gave up everything so he could have the life he had now. Daniel closed his eyes. One question echoed relentlessly through his mind, like the beating of a heart he could no longer quiet. If love always finds its way back, does he have the right to move forward? And in the stillness, Daniel understood a frightening truth, no matter how far he tried to run. The connection between him and Victoria was tightening with each passing day, like two souls drawn together by a fate they feared, yet couldn't deny. But he also knew the greatest fear had not arrived yet. Because the thread binding them was leading them toward a boundary they would soon have no choice but to face. One windy evening, just after Daniel finished putting Liam to bed and was tidying a few toys scattered across the sofa, his phone vibrated. The name on the screen made his heart stop before his mind could even react. Victoria. For a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. He stared at the screen for several seconds before finally answering his voice, low and cautious, as though even a single word might shatter the fragile balance between them. "Daniel, are you busy tonight?" Victoria's voice was different, softer, more fragile, carrying something Daniel could not immediately name. He glanced at the clock. Nearly 10 at night. At this hour, a billionaire like Victoria should have been in a meeting or reviewing reports, not calling him with a voice that trembled like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. "No," Daniel replied. "What is it?" Victoria was silent for a moment, then exhaled, barely audible. "Could you come to the estate for a moment? I found something you need to see." No explanation, no context. But from her tone alone, Daniel knew this was not small. He put on his jacket, locked the door gently, so he would not wake Liam, and drove through the night toward a place he once believed he would never enter again, not as an outsider, but as a man carrying the most conflicted heart of his life. When Daniel stepped into the east sitting room, Victoria was standing beside the tall window, her brown hair catching the soft gold of the lamp, her reflection in the glass appearing ghost-like, delicate, breakable. On the table before her was a wooden box Daniel had never seen. She turned when she heard him enter. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from holding tears back for far too long. "Daniel," she whispered, "I am sorry for calling so late, but I could not keep this to myself." She opened the box. Inside was a journal, not the pale blue one Daniel had read before, but a thicker, older one, bound in black leather, its edges frayed, its pages nearly torn with age. The first page bore Madeline's handwriting, but not the youthful, hopeful strokes from the earlier journal. These words trembled. They were exhausted. They carried fear. Victoria pushed the journal toward him. "I found it in my mother's storage room," she said. "It seems Madeline wrote another journal before she disappeared, and my mother hid it." Daniel sat down, his hands shaking as he opened the first page. The very first line hit him like a blow to the chest. "If someone is reading this one day, it means I was not able to come back." Daniel inhaled sharply, but the breath stuck in his lungs. He turned to the next page. Madeline wrote about her fear that her family would find Daniel, about her mother hiring people to follow her, about whispered conversations she overheard from staff suggesting her mother planned to use her influence and power to force Daniel away, even resorting to legal traps that could destroy him. Daniel froze, his heart tightening painfully. He had never known she was carrying all that alone. He thought of the nights Emma came home, tired but smiling still. He thought of the moments she held him a little tighter without explanation. He had been blind. "She worried about you so much," Victoria began, then her voice broke. "She believed you would die or lose your freedom if she did not run." Daniel closed his eyes. Pain spread down his neck into his chest, seeping through every inch of him. He did not know whether he was crying, but his eyes burned. "Victoria," he whispered, "thank you for telling me." But then he saw it. Victoria was not emotional only for Madeline. The way she looked at him carried sorrow, empathy, and something more. Something Daniel felt too. A long silence fell between them, so vast and deep he could hear the clock ticking across the room. He lifted his gaze, and their eyes met. This time, neither of them looked away. Victoria stepped closer. 1 step. 2. 3. Daniel felt the air thicken, as if the entire room were shrinking until all that existed were two people crossing the threshold of shared grief toward something forbidden yet impossible to resist. "Daniel," Victoria said, her voice cracking. "I do not know what this means. I do not know if I even have the right to feel this. But when I see how you raise Liam, when I read what Madeline wrote about you, Daniel whispered, "Victoria, do not." But his feet did not move back. His heart did not either. The remaining distance between them was no more than a breath. Victoria raised her hand slowly, hesitantly, and placed it over his. They both trembled. And in that moment, the moment when two lonely souls found warmth in each other, Daniel knew what was about to happen. He felt himself leaning toward her, drawn by a force stronger than logic. Victoria leaned toward him too, her eyes half closed, her lips parting just slightly. They were only a few centimeters apart. One breath, one shared warmth, one emotional collision with no turning back. But then A single image burst through Daniel's mind, like lightning tearing through darkness. Emma's smile. His breath collapsed. He jerked back as though burned. "No," Daniel said, his voice breaking. "No, I cannot do this." Victoria remained still, her lips trembling, her eyes widening with shock and hurt. "Daniel, I am sorry," he said, gripping his temples. I cannot do this to Emma. I cannot do this to you, or to myself." Victoria covered her mouth, as if to stop a sob from escaping. She shook her head, tears falling despite her efforts to hold them back. "I do not know what that was. I am sorry." "It is not your fault," Daniel said quickly. He stepped back further, as if distance alone could help him breathe. The entire room spun, and there they stood, two people bound tightly by the memory of someone gone, with a distance between them that had suddenly grown into an unbridgeable chasm. "I need time," Daniel said, almost whispering. "I have to think." Victoria nodded, the movement so fragile it looked like it might break her. "I understand." Daniel did not look back as he walked out of the room. He did not look at Victoria's tears. He did not look at the open journal, lying like an unhealed wound on the table. He only knew one thing: if he stayed a second longer, he would lose himself. And if he lost himself, he feared he would lose Emma's memory too. But Daniel did not know that the distance he created, the refusal, the pain between them, none of it was the end. It was only the beginning of a chapter neither of them was prepared for. A chapter where every buried wound would rise again, reshaping them forever. For 3 weeks after the night they almost crossed the line, Daniel nearly cut off all contact with Victoria. He did not answer her messages, did not pick up her calls, and avoided even letting his mind drift in her direction. Every time his phone lit up, his heart lurched, as if squeezed by an invisible fist, then dropped heavily to the bottom of his stomach. He was afraid of his own feelings, afraid they would betray Emma's memory, afraid that Liam would be pulled into a storm he never deserved. Victoria eventually stopped calling after the second week. The silence between them grew into a long shadow, filling the empty spaces of Daniel's sleepless nights. It was Liam who broke that silence first, his voice small and sad, as he asked, "Why doesn't Aunt V come anymore? Dad, did I do something bad?" Daniel felt his heart collapse. He knew then that this silence was hurting not only him and Victoria, but also Liam, the child who bore no fault except loving with an unguarded heart. One quiet Sunday morning, Daniel suddenly said, "Do you want to visit Mom today?" Liam immediately brightened, nodding rapidly. So they went, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers Liam had gathered along the way. The cemetery rested peacefully under soft sunlight, the wind rustling through the trees like someone whispering a gentle sigh. Daniel knelt beside Emma's grave, his hand trembling as he placed the flowers on the cold stone. "Hey, love," he whispered. Liam put his small hand on his mother's name and said, "Mom, I miss you." Daniel could not speak another word. Everything lodged in his throat. Then footsteps sounded softly behind them. Daniel turned. His heart nearly stopped. Victoria stood there without makeup, without the armor of a billionaire executive. Just Victoria, a woman, grieving the sister she lost, grieving the silence between her and Daniel, grieving a loneliness few could understand. When their eyes met, the weeks of distance dissolved like mist. "I am sorry," Victoria whispered. "I did not know you and Liam would be here today. I can leave if you want." Daniel shook his head, the gesture coming before conscious thought. "No, stay." Victoria stepped toward the grave of Madeline Emma and knelt opposite him. Liam looked at her, then quietly reached for her hand. The moment he touched her, Victoria broke into tears. "Madeline, my little sister," she said, her voice shaking as she spoke to the gravestone. "I am sorry. I did not find you. I was angry at you for so long. I did not know what you went through." Daniel watched her tremble, watch her crumble under the weight of a grief she had carried alone for 14 years. Then Victoria turned to Daniel, her eyes red yet as clear as water. "There is something I have to say. I have feelings for you. I know it is wrong. I know you are hurting, and I never want to step on Madeline's memory. But I cannot pretend anymore." Daniel felt the world tilt. He looked at Emma's name, carved into the stone, then at Victoria, who stood there, frightened, vulnerable and aching. "I think about you too," Daniel admitted, his voice breaking. "More than I should. But I am scared. Scared that loving you means betraying Emma." A gentle breeze drifted past them, carrying the soft rustle of leaves like someone far away smiling with understanding. Victoria held Daniel's gaze. Madeline wrote in her journal that what she wanted most was for you to be loved, to be happy. If one day she was gone, she wanted you to find something good again. Daniel inhaled sharply, as though a knot around his heart had finally loosened. Liam whispered, "Mom is not mad, Dad. I know it. She is happy when you are happy." Daniel looked at his son, and in that moment, he believed it. He believed Emma Madeline had never wanted him to stay trapped in grief. She had run from an entire world just to love him freely. She would want him to continue living with that same freedom. Daniel took Liam's hand, then extended his other hand toward Victoria. She stared at his hand, hesitant, then placed hers into it. Their warmth folded into one. None of them spoke again. They simply stood there, allowing the wind to carry away the heaviness of a past all three had held for too long. As they walked out of the cemetery, Liam looked up and asked, "Aunt V, can you have lunch with me?" Victoria looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at her. A brief silence. Then he nodded softly. "Yes, but we go slow. Let's be friends first." Victoria smiled, the gentlest, most beautiful smile Daniel had ever seen on her face. And in that moment, under the soft, late-morning light, Daniel knew Emma had given him permission to step into a new chapter, not to replace her, but to continue the life she never had the chance to finish to live. That lunch was not an ordinary meeting, but the first small doorway opening between two worlds that were never meant to touch. Daniel slowed the car as he saw Victoria step out of her vehicle, while Liam in the back seat waved excitedly as though greeting a long-lost relative. Victoria smiled a smile, both hesitant and relieved, a kind of softness Daniel had never seen on her before. They chose a small lakeside cafe. Nothing fancy, nothing crowded, just sunlight glittering on the water like strips of gold and the gentle rustling of willow trees along the shore. A peaceful place, quiet enough for all three of them to breathe without suppressing anything. Liam sat between them, eating his sandwich, while eagerly recounting how a schoolmate teased him that his drawing of Jupiter looked like a giant pizza, and Daniel found himself quietly watching every shift in Victoria's expression. Each time she laughed at something, Liam said, another layer of her defenses seemed to fall away. And each time Daniel saw that happen, something in his own chest loosened too, as though a tight band wrapped around him for months had eased one more notch. But both adults knew the distance between them had not vanished. It was still there, not a cold wall like before, but a thin, fragile line requiring both caution and courage to cross. After lunch, they took Liam to a nearby park. The boy ran ahead, while Daniel and Victoria walked slowly down the stone path, sunlight filtering through the trees and scattering soft patches of gold at their feet. "Are you doing better?" Victoria asked, gently, as if afraid her voice might shatter the peace around them. "I am trying," Daniel answered honestly. "Some days I feel like I am walking on water. One wrong step and I sink." Victoria lowered her gaze slightly, her voice roughened by emotion. "I understand. I feel the same." Daniel paused. "I do not want to do wrong by Madeline." Victoria looked up, and her expression softened in a way that held no pain, only respect. "Madeline loved you, Daniel. That never changes. But because she loved you, she wanted you to keep living, not remain trapped in her memory. She knew you are not someone who lets go easily, but she also knew you are someone who deserves to be loved again." Daniel did not reply, not because he doubted her words, but because they struck too deeply, tightening his throat. If anyone else had spoken them, he would have rejected them instantly. But coming from Madeline's sister, the one person still carrying the weight of her past, those words felt both heavy and painfully true. Liam ran back toward them and grabbed both their hands. "Dad, Aunt V, come watch me climb this." The two adults exchanged a glance, and for the first time in weeks, they laughed together without guilt. In that shared laughter was no desire, no hesitation, only acknowledgement. They were walking the same path, slowly, carefully, but no longer turning away from each other. Daniel watched Victoria interact with Liam, watched her crouch down to fix the boy's jacket, watched her place a gentle hand on his shoulder, as though she had loved him for years instead of weeks. What Daniel felt in that moment was not the thrill of seeing a woman, but the quiet stirring of hope. Hope, he believed, had been buried with Emma. As the sun dipped lower, they said goodbye in the parking lot. Liam hugged Victoria as if they had known each other forever. She bent to kiss the top of his head, then rose to face Daniel. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she said softly. Daniel shook his head. "It is not a chance. It is just us learning how to exist after loss." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the evening light. "Then let us keep learning together, shall we?" Daniel exhaled long and deep, as though setting down a stone he had carried for far too long. "Yes, but slowly." Slowly, Victoria repeated, with a small, hopeful smile. As Daniel drove Liam home, the boy giggled cheerfully in the back seat over a heart-shaped leaf Victoria had picked for him. And Daniel, he glanced at the rear-view mirror and saw himself smiling too. Not because he was ready for a new love, but because for the first time in a very long time he could see a road ahead of him, no longer fogged, no longer closed, but open with possibilities he never believed he had the right to dream about again. When the car turned down the quiet road leading past the cemetery, Daniel glanced at the rows of swaying maple trees. In that fleeting moment, he could swear he heard the leaves whispering. A soft laugh, a blessing from the woman he had lost, the woman who loved him enough to run from the world just to live freely beside him, whispering through the wind, "Thank you for living. Keep going, Daniel." And he did. Not to replace the love he once had, but to continue the story Madeline had placed in his hands, a heart still capable of loving again. A future imperfect yet real, a new family born from old fractures, yet still able to shine like the last light of day, resting gently on her gravestone, not bringing the past back, but making it beautiful. From the perspective of an expert in healing and human connection, the story of Daniel, Victoria, and Madeline shows us that loss is not an ending, but the beginning of a journey back to oneself. Some wounds never disappear, yet they can become the places where light enters, where people learn to love again, without betraying the memory of those who are gone. Love does not exist to replace what came before, but to continue it, and it is the courage to face pain that opens the path toward a new future. If this story touched you, please like the video to help spread a message of hope after loss, and subscribe to follow more journeys filled with emotional depth. Before you leave, comment the phrase "let us continue" as a reminder that the human heart can always move forward, even after it has been broken.